Hello, and welcome back. Wherever you are right now, in bed with the lights off, under blankets with headphones in, lying somewhere quiet with the sound of a house settling around you, take a moment to arrive fully. Let whatever was pulling at your attention before this moment recede. Let the weight of the day, the unfinished thoughts and the undone tasks and things that are waiting for tomorrow, let all of it move to the edges. You don't need to carry any of it right now. You can set it down for a while. Tonight we're doing something that I've been wanting to do for a long time. We're going to look at every single boss in Bloodborne, every creature, every corrupted hunter, every twisted scholar, every cosmic horror and tragic servant that stands across from you in the dark streets and the nightmare halls and the impossible depths of Yharnam. We're going to look at them one by one, in the order the story places them, and we're going to look at them not as fights, but as what they actually are. They are stories. Every single one of these encounters is a portrait of something that went wrong, a door that opened that should have stayed closed, a belief that was held too tightly for too long by someone who had built too much of their identity on the holding, a bargain made in grief or ambition or the particular human desperation that comes from having run out of other options and needing to believe that this path, this source of power or healing or salvation would be different from the ones that failed before. Most of the bosses in Bloodborne were people once. A few of them were people who believed deeply, with genuine conviction, in what they were doing and paid for that belief in the worst way imaginable. Some are cosmic entities carrying their own ancient grief, mourning losses we can barely comprehend through the fog of how alien their experience of existence is, and every single one of them, without exception, is evidence of what happens when the systems built around the old blood finally collapse under the weight of what they've been doing all along. Bloodborne is not a game that announces its themes. It doesn't stop the action to tell you what to think about what you're seeing. It puts things in front of you and trusts you to look at them carefully enough to understand a screaming shape on a bridge, a music box in a child's hands, a skull with writing on the inside that the person who prayed before it may never have read. The bosses are the clearest expressions of this approach. Each one is a dossier on a life, delivered in the form of a fight in the dark, and the fight itself is the story. The way the Cleric Beast moves is the story of what the blood does to someone who believed in it most fervently. The way Gascoigne stops when you play the music box is the story of what love can survive and what it can't. The way Ludwig picks up his sword at half health and fights with precision he shouldn't still be capable of is the story of what conviction means when the body it was housed in has been transformed beyond recognition. We'll cover the entire base game and the Old Hunter's DLC, moving through them in the order that Bloodborne's story unfolds from the great bridge of central Yharnam, where the night begins and something screams in the dark above the rooftops, through the unravelling of the healing church's architecture of secrets and lies, into the nightmare realms where the worst of what the hunt produced is preserved in permanent torment, all the way to the final confrontation in the Twilight Garden with the force that has been running the dream from the beginning. This isn't a boss guide. There are no strategies here, no tips for getting through the encounter. This is an obituary. A proper accounting of what each of these beings was before the blood and the dream and the church and the hunt took them. A record of lives the game keeps in fragments, scattered across item descriptions and environmental, details and the sounds the creatures make when they're dying, trusting you to collect those fragments and build from them the portrait of what was lost. So, let the quiet deepen around you. And let me tell you what each of them was and what brought them to where you found them in the dark. Before Bloodborne gives you anything to fight, before the night properly begins and the city opens up and the hunt starts in earnest, it gives you a sound. You climb a ladder in the very opening minutes. You're newly arrived in Yharnam, freshly infected with the blood as part of whatever arrangement brought you to this city at this particular moment in its history. The streets are gas-lit and gothic and gorgeous in a way that doesn't quite hide how wrong they feel. The proportion slightly off, the shadows slightly too deep, the smell of the place suggesting something beneath the surface that the cobblestones and the wrought iron lampposts can't quite cover. You reach the top of the ladder, and somewhere out there in the darkness beyond the rooftops, something screams. Not a roar, not the territorial declaration of an animal establishing its presence. A scream high, ragged, carrying across the distance between you and whatever produced it with the unmistakable quality of something in agony. This is not the sound of strength. This is the sound of suffering, and it comes to you as an introduction before you've seen anything, before you know where you are or what you're supposed to do, as the first honest piece of information the game gives you about the world you've entered. Something is hurting out there, and you are going to find it. The Cleric Beast is on the Great Bridge of central Yharnam, and it has been screaming at the moon for longer than it has any capacity to track. The name comes from what the Healing Church's own records describe as a rumour, and the game is careful about this qualification, because the Church did not make public announcements when its own clergy transformed. What the Sword Hunter badge eventually confirms is not a rumour, but institutional history stated plainly. Ludwig was the first of many Healing Church hunters to come, many of whom were clerics. As it was, clerics transformed into the most hideous beasts. That phrase, most hideous, is doing a lot of work. Not largest, not most dangerous, though both of those may also be true. Most hideous because what the cleric's transformation reveals is the fullest possible measure of the distance between what the Church taught and what the old blood actually does. The clerics believed. This is the essential fact. They believed in the doctrine of blood ministration with the full weight of their professional identity and their spiritual conviction. They stood at the altar and administered the old blood to the faithful as a sacred act. They received it themselves in ritual communion, in the way that religious practice makes the symbolic gesture into something that is meant to transform the participant. They believed that the blood was holy, that the changes it caused in some recipients were a failure of those recipients' faith, rather than an inherent property of the substance, that a person of genuine and sufficient conviction could receive the old blood indefinitely without succumbing to what it always eventually does. And so when the blood finally overwhelmed them, when the dam of religious conviction finally cracked and then gave way entirely, everything that had been held back rushed out at once. Years of suppressed transformation, compressed behind years of faith, released in a single catastrophic event. Miyazaki described this in an interview with a clarity that makes the design philosophy explicit. The stronger the suppression, the larger and more extreme the beast that emerges when the suppression finally fails. The longer the shackle held, the more violent the creature that emerges when it breaks. The Cleric Beast on the Great Bridge is enormous, because whoever it was believed enormously. Its antlers and its asymmetric limbs and its hollow eye sockets and the ribs visible through patchy fur, all of this is the physical expression of faith that spent years holding back a tide that faith alone was never going to hold back forever. The nails are worth examining. There are nails driven into the Cleric Beast's legs, visible if you look closely during the encounter. The most coherent reading of this detail is simple and devastating. The habit of blood vial administration, the muscle memory of a healer reaching for the blood to address a wound, persists in the transformed body after every other capacity for deliberate thought has been erased by the transformation. The creature that was once a cleric, that once administered healing to others as a spiritual and medical practice, is driving nails into itself and trying to apply blood vials to the wounds, the gesture of healing that it can no longer perform coherently. The practice of care that has survived as reflex after everything else, that made the person who they were, has been consumed by what the blood did to them. The specific identity of this Cleric Beast is never confirmed. Laurence, the founder of the Healing Church, became the first Cleric Beast and is encountered separately in the DLC. This creature on the Great Bridge is someone else. Brador, the church assassin found later in the Old Hunters, killed a companion who had transformed and wears that companion's scalp as testimony, as a reminder to himself of what he witnessed and what it cost him to address it. There were many over the years. The church's history is full of them, each one a story the institution decided was better managed quietly than acknowledged honestly. When you fight the Cleric Beast and it screams again, now close, now directed at you, the same sound you heard from the ladder now filling the bridge, that is not aggression. It is not the sound of something that has decided you are prey. It is the sound the body makes when the consciousness still trapped somewhere inside it, in whatever diminished and terrified form the transformation has left of the original person, registers again what it has become and has nothing else to do with that knowledge except scream. Every beast in Yharnam sounds like it is suffering because every beast is suffering. The hunt is mercy. This here, before anything else has been taught, is the first truth Bloodborne offers. The monsters are in pain, and the pain has a cause, and that cause has a name. Father Gascoigne is the first mandatory boss. Bloodborne requires you to pass through him. His encounter is not optional. His story is not something you can root around, because his story is the entire story, told in miniature and with devastating completeness. What the blood does to Gascoigne is what the blood does to everyone it touches for long enough. He is not a cautionary tale about excess or weakness. He is a cautionary tale about time, and about what time plus exposure always produces eventually. He came from somewhere outside Yharnam. The title he carried, Father, the pastoral honorific of foreign clergy, is not a healing church designation. The church used Vicar for its highest role and had its own gradations for the others. Father comes from wherever Gascoigne was before, from some other country with some other tradition, a place where priests were called Father because they were understood as paternal figures to the people in their care, people who came to them with ordinary human crises and needed someone with the stability and the patience to receive what was brought to them. He was once that kind of person, pastoral, present, the kind of person who was paid, in a sense, to care about other people's pain. He came to Yharnam and joined the Healing Church Hunters. He was partnered with Henrik, a veteran whose description carries the word gallant, a word that suggests more than mere competence, something closer to chivalrous attentiveness, the quality of someone who notices what's happening around them and responds to it with consideration. The two of them were effective together, famed for it, in the particular way that hunters could be famed within a community that officially pretended the hunt wasn't happening, while structurally depending on it entirely. Somewhere in all of this, Gascoigne met Viola. What he gave her was a brooch, a deep red jewel, the colour of a blood droplet catching gaslight. Something he found while on the hunt, in a place where beauty was never the point. In the wreckage of what the hunt left behind, he found something that was simply beautiful, and he kept it because he wanted to give it to her. Viola wore it always. They had 2 daughters. They had a life built in the particular configuration that hunters' families must build their lives in. The routines that account for the nights he is gone, the sounds that mean he's back. The gradual understanding that the daughters develop of what their father does, and why there are nights when the locks are checked twice before anyone sleeps. The hunt asked too much of him for too long, not in a single catastrophic moment he could point to afterward, not in an event with clear before and after. It asked too much the way a tide comes in on a flat beach, so gradually, so incrementally, that you do not notice how far up the shore you are now standing until the water is already past your ankles. He began to forget. Not small details first, the large things, coming home, whose face was at the window, what his daughters' voices sounded like when they were frightened or when they were laughing, what Viola's face looked like when she was asleep. Viola found a way to reach him. A music box, small and mechanical, wound by hand, playing a tune that meant something specific to the 2 of them. The kind of melody that 2 people in love develop an intimate relationship with, not through deciding to, but simply through enough shared experience of it, until the song becomes theirs without either of them choosing that. When Gascoigne had been out too long, when the hunt had taken him far enough from himself that he couldn't find the way back on his own, she would go and find him wherever he was, and she would play the music box. And the sound of it, that particular melody, that specific sequence of notes, was enough to reach through whatever the blood had built between the man and the surface. Some part of him that the transformation hadn't touched yet still recognized that sound, still followed it, still came back to her. It was a lifeline they had built together out of necessity, an act of love expressed as a small mechanical object that played a song when you wound the spring. On the night the game takes place, Gascoigne did not come home. Viola went looking for him, in her haste, in the fear of what it means when he doesn't come home. She forgot the music box. We find him in the tomb of Whedon. Moving among bodies he has been destroying long past any functional purpose, still moving in the wreckage of things that are already thoroughly dead. He has crossed the threshold. When you approach him, there is a moment, brief, terrible, the last moment, where he is still producing language. "Beasts all over the shop," he says. "You'll be one of them sooner or later." He smells the blood on you with a clarity that has replaced rather than supplemented the other senses. "The sweet blood," he says. "It sings to me," and then the language stops, and the beast takes over, and whatever conversation was possible is over. Viola is dead somewhere nearby. Whether Gascoigne found her in his beast state, without the music to orient his recognition, and the instinct that replaced his humanity drove the violence, or whether the mob that was moving through the area took her and he found her body after, and the grief was the thing that finally broke the last structure holding the transformation at bay. The lore leaves this with great care. The ambiguity is not sloppiness. It is the accurate reflection of what grief and guilt and the unknowability of another person's worst moment actually feel like when you're standing in the aftermath. What is certain is that her brooch lies on her body. The deep red jewel, the gift he found on the hunt, the thing he kept because she should have something beautiful. The music box his daughter gives you through the locked window can be used during the fight, played in proximity to Gascoigne in the middle of the violence it cuts through. He stops, he clutches his head, he mutters to himself in a voice that is trying to be the voice of the man who loved Viola, the fragment of him surfacing briefly through everything the blood has layered over him, recognizing the melody, reaching toward what it means, finding for one terrible moment the place where the music used to lead him. It gives you an opening to attack. This is simultaneously a mercy, using the last connection to his humanity to end the suffering, and one of the most quietly cruel things the game asks you to do. When he falls, in the dying sound his beast form makes as it goes, there is something that might be a voice underneath the animal noise. Forgive me, to Viola, almost certainly. Perhaps to his daughters, perhaps to the strangers he killed in the tomb before you arrived. Perhaps to himself, the version of himself that gave Viola the brooch and came home in the mornings, the version that is gone and that he cannot get back. When you return the brooch to his daughter, when you tell her, in whatever way the exchange of an item communicates what happened, she says one word, "Mummy." And then the window goes quiet and stays quiet. All of Bloodborne's grief is in that syllable. The child who lost both parents to the same night. The music box that wasn't there when it was needed. The distance between the man who found a jewel because he wanted her to have something beautiful, and the creature on the ground in the Tomb of Eden who had forgotten what beauty was long before the night that ended him. Deep in old Yharnam, past the ruins of a district that the healing church incinerated and then sealed and then did not speak of publicly again, past the beastmen with their bent postures and their continuing existence in the ash, past the riflemen perched in the ruined towers taking shots at anything that moves through the dark below them. In the basement of what was once a church, something pale and skeletal is waiting for anyone who comes far enough in. The story of old Yharnam is one of the most clarifying things the healing church ever did, in the sense that it clarified exactly what the church was and what it was willing to do to maintain the structure it had built. When the scourge of beasts spread through the district beyond any possibility of quiet management, when the transformations were happening too fast and too visibly for the usual mechanisms of secrecy to contain, the church faced a genuine decision about what to do. They could stop blood ministration, they could acknowledge publicly what they now knew about what the old blood does given enough time and enough exposure. They could admit the error and accept the consequences of that admission. They could not do any of those things without losing their authority, their influence, and the entire foundation upon which their power rested. So instead they made a different choice. They sent the healing church hunters and the powder kegs. the weapons specialists and explosive artisans who built their careers on the high damage end of the hunt's requirements, and they sealed the exits of Old Yharnam from the outside, and they set everything inside on fire. Everything. Everyone. The already transformed and the not yet transformed. The sick and the healthy. The elderly and the very young and everyone between. The official position was disease containment. The scourge had to be prevented from spreading to the rest of Yharnam, and the only way to prevent that was to ensure nothing in Old Yharnam survived to carry it forward. The actual truth was simpler and worse. The church was managing its reputation by eliminating the most visible evidence of what blood ministration produced, before that evidence became impossible for the rest of the city to ignore. The burning did not stop the scourge. The plague appeared in other districts, in other neighbourhoods, spreading through Yharnam via the blood that the church kept administering to new patients in the weeks and months and years after Old Yharnam was sealed. The burning accomplished nothing except the elimination of the district and everyone in it. One hunter in particular, Jura, who had helped carry out the operation, came to understand this eventually. He returned to Old Yharnam and took up a permanent position on one of the towers, protecting the beasts that still roamed the burned ruins from any hunter who came to finish what the fire started. He came to see the beasts not as monsters to be culled, but as the people. They were victims who didn't deserve the additional cruelty of being hunted in the state the blood had left them. His presence in Old Yharnam is the game's most direct statement that the hunt is not heroism. The blood-starved beast occupies the church at the bottom of Old Yharnam. It is what the ashen blood variant of the scourge produces, the same fundamental transformation driven by the old blood, but carrying additional toxic properties alongside the ordinary changes, poison seeping through the physical alterations like a secondary corruption running in parallel with the first. The creatures of Old Yharnam poison. Their bodies are contaminating in ways that beasts in the rest of the city are not. This is the character of a plague that was sealed inside its own ruins, cut off from any possibility of treatment or management, left to develop in complete isolation for however many years passed between the burning and the night of the game. The blood-starved beast has had all that time to become what it is. Its name is literal. It is starved. Ribs visible through skin drawn tight over a frame that appears to be consuming itself. The movements of something that has not eaten in a very long time, that operates out of a hunger made permanent and unrelenting by the transformation rather than by mere deprivation. The beast state replaces ordinary hunger with something that cannot be satisfied regardless of what it consumes, because it is no longer about food. It is about the blood, always the blood, the thing that made it what it is still calling to it from inside what it has become. Consider the geography of where this creature ended up. Of all the places in Old Yharnam where it could have come to rest and occupy and establish itself as the nightmare at the end of the district, it is in the church, the place of communion, the place where the faithful of Old Yharnam once came to receive blood ministration from the healing church's clergy, to kneel before the altar and open their veins to the sacred substance that the church said would heal them and make them stronger and bring them closer to the divine. This is where the blood-starved beast waits, in the ruins of the faith that produced it, in the building that was once the centre of Old Yharnam's relationship with the institution that decided Old Yharnam was expendable. There is no text in the Bible that says this is meaningful. There doesn't need to be. The blood-starved beast in the Church of Old Yharnam is as clear a sentence as Bloodborne ever writes. When you defeat it, the reward is a Thumerian chalice, a ritual artifact from the ancient civilization that discovered the old blood in the first place. The people who built the labyrinthine dungeons beneath the city, and whose communion with the Great One set in motion everything that eventually produced the burning of Old Yharnam. The connection between the blood-starved beast and the Thumerian tradition is never made entirely explicit, but the reward isn't accidental. Whatever this creature was, wherever its origins lie in the tangle of old blood and ancient ritual, and the Church's ongoing exploitation of both, it connects to what is oldest, and oldest is also the source, and the source is what produced the fire. At the summit of the cathedral ward, past the attendant giants, and the increasingly desperate positioning of defences that are clearly no longer maintaining anything, the last vicar of the healing church is on her knees in the grand cathedral. She is praying. The prayer she speaks audible during the cutscene of her transformation, sometimes audible as fragments during the fight if you're close enough, and the battle has a quiet moment, is liturgy, not a personal prayer in the sense of an individual addressing something private. Formal, studied, recited with the cadence of words, spoken so many thousands of times that they continue emerging even when the conscious mind has mostly given up directing the process. She calls for her kin to partake in communion and feast upon the old blood. She speaks of the frailty of men, their weak wills, their young minds. She says to seek the old blood. Let us partake in communion. Let us bear witness to the eldritch truth. These are the foundational doctrines of the healing church, the justifications, the promises, the framework that made blood ministration feel like an act of spiritual advancement rather than medical intervention, with catastrophic and now well-documented side effects. She is reciting, at the moment of her own transformation, into precisely what the doctrine she is reciting created, the doctrine that created it. Vicar is the Church's word for its highest representative, derived from the Latin word for a person who acts on behalf of another, a proxy, someone who stands in for the real authority. Amelia received the pendant from Laurence, the founder, which was his symbol and became hers when she succeeded him. She had watched Laurence transform into the first Cleric Beast. She had presumably watched the vicars between his tenure and hers meet the same progression at different rates. She had spent her career as the leader of an institution that she understood, at whatever level she permitted herself to understand. It was built on a mistake, managing that mistake, maintaining the pretense that the blood's benefits outweighed its costs, watching the city decline around the church that was supposed to be serving it. What do you do with that kind of knowledge when you've built your entire life inside the institution that the knowledge indicts? When admitting it publicly would mean the collapse of everything you've administered and everything you've given your life to. When the people who depend on the institution for medicine, for structure, for the spiritual comfort that rituals provide even when the doctrine they're built on is false, would be left with nothing if you told them the truth? Amelia's answer was to come to the grand cathedral and kneel before the altar and pray. Not in a posture of request or petition, not asking for rescue or reversal. In the posture of someone who has nothing left to hold on to except the form of a faith whose content she can no longer access in good conscience. The gestures that remain when the meaning they were supposed to carry has been corrupted beyond recovery. She clutched Laurence's pendant and she recited what she had been taught, and she knelt before his skull, which the church had placed on the altar as a relic, which has an inscription on the inside of the skull's cavity that reads, "Fear the old blood, Willem's warning." The warning Laurence couldn't bring himself to follow, carved into what remains of him, and placed behind the altar for every vicar after him to pray before. Whether any of them ever turned it over and read what was written, there is the question the game poses in silence. The fight against Amelia is among the most visually arresting in this base game. Her enormous pale form, the tattered robes of her office still visible through the transformation, the antlers rising from a skull that has warped past any human shape, and she heals herself during the fight, in beast form, having lost the capacity for deliberate thought. She presses her hands together and the gesture draws the healing she needs. The posture of prayer persists after everything else that constituted the person has been consumed by what the blood did to her. What stays longest, when everything else is stripped away, is what was most fundamental. For Vicar Amelia, the last thing to go was not strength or strategy, or even survival instinct. It was the posture of faith, the shape of a belief she could no longer justify, held by a body that had long since stopped being able to question anything. In Hemwick Charnel Lane, the district where Yharnam's dead are processed into the materials the church requires for its continuing operations, a place of industrial necessity hidden from the parts of the city that prefer not to think about the supply chain for what they receive in communion. Two women practice from a worn stone building in a way that is older than anything the healing church built. The Witch of Hemwick is actually two beings. The fight reveals this partway through. You defeat one, take the other down to half health, and a second materializes. They work together with the absent coordination of people who have shared a practice for a very long time. They summon the madmen of Hemwick while they move through visibility and invisibility, one of them always casting while you try to keep track of where the other is. The madmen are the key. They have no eyes. Their sockets are empty, the eyes removed or never present. Their faces smooth where features should be. This is the physical endpoint of a philosophy that runs through the entire intellectual history of Bloodborne scholars. Master Willem's insistence on eyes on the inside, the idea that external sight is a limitation rather than an asset, that true perception comes from an interior transformation rather than from what the physical eyes can show you. The madmen in Hemwick are what happens when this idea is applied to actual bodies, without the wisdom to know when the idea is being taken somewhere it was never meant to go. They had their external sight removed in service of a process that was supposed to grant them something deeper. What they gained is madness. What they lost is visible on every blank face. The witches themselves are practitioners of rites that predate the healing church entirely. Their connection is to the Hintertomb branch of the Thumerian dungeons, the sub-level of the ancient labyrinths that runs under this part of the city, the deeper and older layer of what the Thumerian civilization built. They are not clerics. They answer to no church hierarchy. They kept their own practice running from a tradition that the church either couldn't access or chose to suppress, and whatever they were building or studying or attempting in the charnel lane of Hemwick was connected to that older knowledge, rather than to anything the church formally sanctioned. What exactly they were doing with the eyes taken from Hemwick's residents is left to the environment to suggest, rather than explain. The eyeless mad servants, the rituals, the components of a practice that operates out of a much older book than anything the Healing Church wrote, these are the evidence. The purpose is yours to construct from them. Three figures in ancient robes stand at the end of the Forbidden Woods, where the path narrows before ascending toward Byrgenwerth. They are not beasts, they are not hunters. They are something older than either guardian serving a queen who has been dead, or something close to dead, for longer than anyone currently alive in Yharnam has been alive at all. The Queen Yharnam they serve is the Pthumerian Queen, the woman whose name the city was given, who appears in the blood-soaked vision after you kill Rom. Dressed in her ceremonial robes with her hands crossed over the child she carried, and her face turned upward toward the descending moon, while a distant cry fills the silence. She entered into a contract with Eden, the formless Great One who leaves traces in blood, and who has no physical body because he exists in a form that transcends the physical. She bore his child. The child was Mergo, an infant Great One, and the bearing of it ended her. Not cleanly, not with the finality of ordinary death, but in the way that Great One adjacent processes tend to end things, leaving a remnant, a consciousness suspended in the space between existence and its absence, present in certain places to those with sufficient insight, but no longer present in the way this would allow anything to be built on it. The shadows serve her still, three of them, in the coordination that suggests deep familiarity. The one with the sword and the torch, the one with the candle staff who summons serpents, the one who can call healing for the group. They guard the approach to Byrgenwerth, which is the approach to the lake where Rom hides, which is the approach to the secret that Queen Yharnam's entire tragedy is anchored to. They stand between that secret and anyone who might disturb it, as they have stood between that secret and everyone who came before you, across however many decades this particular duty has been ongoing. The serpents deserve attention. In Bloodborne's visual and symbolic vocabulary, serpents are specifically associated with Eden, the formless god, the one who exists only in blood and breath and the absence of a body. The Shadows of Yharnam summon them through the candle staff, call them from some space adjacent to this one, incorporate them into the violence of their defense. They carry in their combat style and in the iconography they summon the visible mark of the relationship their queen had with the god who never had a face. They are warriors who fight in the name of a dead queen and an absent god, in service of a secret that has already produced more catastrophe than they can know, and they do not waver. In a game full of institutions that consumed what they served, full of hierarchies that demanded loyalty and gave betrayal in return, the Shadows of Yharnam are notable for the uncomplicated quality of their devotion. They were given a duty. They are still performing it. This civilization that assigned them that duty is buried under a city of people who don't know it existed. Their queen is a ghost suspended between states. None of this has changed what they do when someone comes down the path. They stand in the way and they fight and they protect the secret they were stationed to protect. Whatever that means about them, about the value of loyalty, about whether duty has meaning when what it was owed to is gone, is something the game leaves open while giving you the clearest possible image of what it looks like in practice. In the jail of Yahargul, in the underground facility where the School of Mensis imprisoned those it captured for the use of its experiments and its ritual, in a cell at the bottom of a section designated by the game as the Graveyard of the Darkbeast. Paarl lies in the stillness that Darkbeasts occupy between disturbances. It looks dead when you find it. The skeleton-shaped mass of dark fur, the blue-white electricity running along the bones and discharging in small arcs across the hair, the enormous frame of a creature that has not moved in some time. A dark beast is technically undead. These creatures have crossed through death and continued, the electricity that saturates them perhaps serving as an ongoing animating current, a charge that refuses to let the body's processes fully cease even after whatever originally maintained them has failed. Paarl is lying in a graveyard because it came here to die, or as close to dying as a dark beast can come, and it has been here since. Then you get too close, and it wakes. The Spark Hunter badge tells you what you need to know about what Paarl was before. The badge was crafted in secret by Archibald, the infamous eccentric of the Healing Church, for his friends. Archibald was a singular figure in the church's scholarly community, a researcher who dedicated his career to artificially replicating the bolt electricity that naturally emanates from dark beasts, working in a style described in his items as closely following the methodology of Byrgenwerth, which is the polite way of saying he worked from first principles with less interest in institutional approval than in understanding the phenomenon he was studying. He built the Tonitrus, the tiny Tonitrus bolt paper. His weapons were not widely adopted. His methods were unpopular. He built them regardless. Every item Archibald created is found in or around Yahar'gul. He was working in this location, in the School of Mensis's territory, with access to the facilities, resources, and presumably its subjects. The most coherent reading of Darkbeast Paarl, supported by location, by the badge, by the graveyard's name, is that Paarl was Archibald's primary research subject, that whatever process of transformation or experimentation Archibald used to study bolt electricity required a direct subject, a person upon whom the replication of the dark beast's natural properties could be tested and observed and refined, and that Paarl was that person, brought to the facility by the Mensis kidnappers, or given to Archibald by the school's administration as a resource for his research. What Paarl became is the visible record of what Archibald's experiments produced. What Paarl tried to do afterward tells you something about the fragment of the person that remained. There is a tunnel dug from the cell outward, clawed through stone toward the wall that separates Yahar'gul from Old Yharnam. An attempt to escape, a direction chosen, not random, not purely instinctive, but aimed at the door that connects the facility to the outside, a specific location that suggests some fragment of navigation, some residual knowledge of where an exit was. The door was locked from the Yahar'gul side. Paarl couldn't get through. It came back to the cell, or perhaps never fully reached the door, and it died in the graveyard with the unfinished tunnel behind it. Whoever this was, whatever they wanted, whoever they came home to, whatever they were doing before the Mensis kidnappers or Archibald's research or both took them, is unknowable now. What remains is the clawed tunnel in the stone wall, the direction chosen when direction still had a referent, the evidence of a last attempt that didn't reach where it was trying to go. You arrive in Yahar'gul having been taken from the street by the bell-ringing women who served the School of Menses, the kidnapped, as the game's chapter designation names this section, those who were collected from Yharnam's population to fuel whatever the school was building in its underground facility. Your path through Yahar'gul is through everything the school produced. The Hippogean jail, the lecture buildings, the architecture of an institution that had decided the advancement of its research justified the cost of everyone it needed to conduct it. The Chime Maidens in the boss arena work continuously throughout the fight, healing the creature, empowering it, sending projectiles at you while you deal with the thing they're maintaining. The fight is designed to be overwhelming because the thing at its center was designed to be overwhelming, assembled from the overwhelming quantity of what the Mensis scholars had access to. It is a mass of human bodies fused together, arms and legs and torsos and pieces of other things combined past the point where individual identity has any remaining meaning, animated by whatever ritual the school was using with the remains of those it processed. It moves as a unit. It falls apart as you damage it, shedding components. It reassembles as the Chime Maidens continue their work. The name is Theology, the One Reborn. One thing assembled from many, reborn through the school's application of Thumerian ritual to the raw material of the bodies the school had accumulated. The principle the school was attempting to demonstrate was connected to what the Chalice dungeons and the Thumerian tradition had always suggested, that death need not be final, that the old blood conferred properties that ordinary organic matter doesn't possess, that something assembled from the church's dead and animated through the right combination of ritual and blood might constitute a new kind of existence, something between human and Great One, something that transcended the individual limitations of any of its components. The name is Theology, the One Reborn. One thing assembled from many, reborn through the school's application of Thumerian ritual to the raw material of the bodies the school had accumulated. The principle the school was attempting to demonstrate was connected to what the Chalice dungeons and the Thumerian tradition had always suggested, that death need not be final, that the old blood conferred properties that ordinary organic matter doesn't possess, that something assembled from the church's dead and animated through the right combination of ritual and blood might constitute a new kind of existence, something between human and Great One, something that transcended the individual limitations of any of its components. What they produced is a heap of corpses that staggers across a courtyard. It is not more than human, it is less. The individual people who composed it destroyed, their identities and memories and capacities dissolved into a collective that has none of the things that made any of them who they were, and possesses only the capacity for undifferentiated violence. The ambition that built it is enormous, and the result is wretched in a way that feels instructive about the school's entire approach to knowledge. They understood the principle, but could not make the principle produce anything except its own failure, assembled from other people's deaths, held together by the Chime Maidens' ongoing effort, falling apart when that effort stops. The church is present in the One Reborn in a way that is hard to look at directly. What is it made of exactly? The bodies of Yharnam's residents, people who received blood ministration from the healing church and were taken by the kidnapping service of Mensis's operatives and brought to Yahar'gul to be used. The One Reborn is not an abstract concept or a symbol. It is people. It is the people the system consumed, assembled into the form that the system decided best expressed what it was trying to build. It falls apart when you damage it and the components scatter across the courtyard floor, and for a moment you can see what it actually was. Not one reborn thing, but many unreturned people, reduced to the material for someone else's grand idea about transcendence. At the edge of a lake that should not exist, a vast silver expanse of perfectly still water, hidden behind the campus of Byrgenwerth College, accessible only by leaping from the balcony and falling into the moon's reflection, an act that doesn't make physical sense but is the only way in. The spider sits in the silence of a space that time has not entered. She is enormous, pale and featureless and covered in eyes the way the game covers everything touched by the Great One's awareness in eyes, the visual vocabulary of insight, of perception that has been granted beyond what human consciousness is designed to process. She is surrounded by dozens of smaller spiders, indistinguishable from each other, patient and close. She does not move when you arrive. She is not hostile. She has been in this lake for a very long time, and nothing in this lake has required hostility from her in a very long time, and she simply sits in the silver water under the impossible moon and exists as what she became. Rom was a scholar of Byrgenwerth. The Japanese title given to her, Hakuchi, meaning fool or idiot, is rendered in the Western translation as vacuous, meaning empty, unintelligent. She received what the scholars of Byrgenwerth were collectively begging the cosmos to give them: the enlightenment, the eyes, the direct transformative contact with a Great One that would grant the insight Willem described as the path to human evolution, the thing that all the experiments with lumen wood and brain lining and blood ministration were approximating from different inadequate angles. Micolash's dialogue tells you how. As you once did for the vacuous Rom, he appeals to Kos, grant us eyes, grant us eyes. Kos transformed her. She went from Byrgenwerth scholar to something kin to the Great Ones. Her consciousness expanded to a scale that human form cannot hold and human language cannot describe. Her body transformed into this pale, enormous, many-eyed thing in the Silver Lake, and she hid. Or more precisely, Master Willem placed her here, in this impossible space behind the college, the moonside lake that shouldn't exist by any ordinary geography, but exists because something like Willem arranged for it to exist, and gave her a purpose: maintain the veil, hide the blood moon's descent, protect the secret of what happened to Queen Yharnam, of what Mergo's existence means, of what the ritual the Mensis scholars would eventually conduct was building toward. The note in Byrgenwerth reads, "The spider hides all manner of rituals certain to reveal nothing, for true enlightenment need not be shared." From one direction, this is a condemnation of what happened to her. She got everything the scholars wanted and hoarded it in a lake, gave nothing back, left her former colleagues to continue their failed experiments with none of what she now possessed. From another direction, it is the most important sentence in the game. True enlightenment need not be shared, because true enlightenment, when it comes, may be something that cannot be shared. Something that the human minds of those who didn't receive it cannot process, even if the person who received it could find a way to communicate it, which they cannot, because they are now a spider in a lake with no mechanism for translation. The Vacuous Spider. The fool who received everything the scholars of Byrgenwerth sought. The answer that cannot speak. The enlightenment that cannot be enlightenment to anyone who wasn't there for the transformation. The wisdom that exists in the spider's expanded consciousness and can be shared with no one and serves no purpose except the one duty she was given: Sit in the lake and maintain the veil and hide what is underneath. When you kill her, the veil falls. The blood moon descends. The amygdalas that have been on the buildings of Yharnam throughout the game, invisible to ordinary perception, become visible to everyone. A vision of Queen Yharnam plays, her blood-soaked dress, her hands over her child, her face turned toward the moon that is coming. And the crying that has been underneath everything, this sound that Rom was maintaining the silence over, begins. In the nightmare of Mensis, the hellscape the school's ritual produced, sustained by Micolash's broken consciousness and anchored to Mergo's presence, Micolash runs. He runs because you're chasing him, and chasing him is how the fight works, and chasing him is also the most accurate metaphor for what he represents. Something always moving, always ahead of you, always through the next door into the next impossible room, leaving fragments of dialogue behind him as he goes. You corner him, he talks, you damage him, he escapes to the next section. The nightmare's architecture accommodates his evasion perfectly, because the nightmare was built from his mind, and his mind has had a long time to become accustomed to this particular shape of avoidance. He wears the Menses cage. The hexagonal iron lattice fitted over his head, his item description reads, was crafted to limit the user's own will in order to achieve a higher plane of being. It was also, his item concludes, from the perspective of an outside observer, precisely what delivered him and his colleagues to their harrowing nightmare. The scholars thought it was a tool for achieving cosmic contact. From the outside, it was obviously a device for removing the cognitive safeguards that keep human minds from dissolving when they encounter what lies beyond them. Micolash still wears it. He has worn it so long that it may be impossible to remove, or he has forgotten it is there, or he is still, even now, trying to use it, still reaching out for more contact with the thing that destroyed him and his colleagues and created the nightmare he runs through. His dialogue while he runs is the most philosophically dense speech in the game, delivered in fragments between your pursuit and his evasion. He addresses Kos directly. Ah, Kos, or some say Cosm. Do you hear our prayers? Then, no, we shall not abandon the dream. Then, with the particular fervour of someone for whom this has become a substitute for coherent thought, grant us eyes, plant eyes on our brains to cleanse our beastly idiocy. He is still asking. The thing he asked for destroyed him and his school, and created an ongoing nightmare, and he is still asking for more of it. This is what the Mensis scholars actually wanted, stripped of all the philosophical scaffolding they built around it. More insight, more contact, more cosmic awareness, more of the thing that the first dose of it proved was incompatible with human consciousness. The problem was not that they failed. The problem is that Micolash in the nightmare has not processed what success cost him, and cannot process it, because the processing requires cognitive capacities that the success eliminated. His death quote in the original Japanese, "Will I wake up? Will I forget everything?" He thinks the nightmare is a dream. He thinks there is a world outside it he is going to return to. He thinks the life he had before the ritual, the scholarship, the colleagues, the waking Yharnam, the specific ambitions that drove the School of Mensis to attempt direct contact with a Great One still exists somewhere, waiting for him to wake up and resume it. The contact that he made and that dissolved the distinction between his consciousness and the nightmare he created has also dissolved his knowledge of the fact that it did this. He achieved enlightenment, and the enlightenment consumed his ability to know what he had achieved and what it had cost. There is no triumph in the fight. There is no triumph in his death. There is only the settling of something that had been ongoing for too long, the ending of a suffering that the sufferer could no longer recognize as suffering. In the upper cathedral ward, in the soaring Gothic halls, the choir occupied in the conviction that architecture reaching toward the heavens was appropriate to the nature of their work, in the rooftop garden where lumenwood trees grow toward a sky that has become something wrong. The successful results of the choir's experimental program wander without purpose. Successful. That is the choir's word for them, because they did not become beasts. They transformed. Yes, their bodies shifted from human into something tall and pale and blue-grey, their heads grown enormous and eye-studded, their movement displaced from the ordinary physics of flesh and bone into something that seems to negotiate space differently. But they did not go down. They went up in the choir's taxonomy, ascended into a category the choir called closer to the Great Ones, elevated beyond the human form that was susceptible to beasthood. The choir operated the Healing Church's orphanage. The official framing was charity, care for children bereft of parents, children whom the scourge had left without families to return to, children the church was providing for out of institutional compassion. The actual function of the orphanage was to maintain a supply of suitable experimental subjects for the choir's research into guided ascension. Children were preferred because their minds were more flexible, more susceptible to the kind of transformation the choir was attempting to direct. If the experiments failed, there were no parents to inquire about what had happened to their child, or to demand accountability from the institution that had taken custody. The church ran the orphanage. The church ran the research. The church controlled both ends of the supply chain and the information about what happened between them. What happened between them is visible in the celestial emissaries. Most of the children died during the transformation attempts or went mad in ways that produced nothing the choir could describe as success. The ones who produced what the choir called a successful result, who transformed without devolving into beasts, became what you encounter in the upper cathedral ward, beings that have no memories of being children, no preferences, no fear of dark rooms, no names they answer to. They have the capacity to project arcane energy and to drift through space, and occasionally, when gathered in sufficient numbers, to call down cosmic fire from the sky above the lumenwood garden. They have nothing else. The people who were inside these bodies before the experiments removed them are gone as thoroughly as if they never existed, replaced by a process that the choir chose, and the children did not. The large celestial emissary boss is the end point of this more transformation, more elevation, more capable of expressing what the process produced. When you kill it and descend into the chambers below, the echoing emptiness is the honest measure of what the choir built. The experiments are abandoned. The creators are gone or mad. The emissaries wander aimlessly in the ruin of a project that was always going to end exactly this way, because any project built on the unconsented transformation of children was never going to end any other way. Below the upper cathedral ward, in the lowest chamber the choir designated for their most sacred work, a space they named the Altar of Despair, which is either an acknowledgement of what actually happened here, or simply a name that sounded appropriately cosmic when they chose it. Ebrietas kneels over the body of something and does not hear you come in. She's not aggressive, she's not preparing. She's bent over whatever lies on the ground before her, another being, possibly another great one. Possibly something the choir's experiments produced and that died here in proximity to her. The exact identity left deliberately unresolved in a posture of grief that is unmistakably grief. An enormous pale entity with tentacles and cosmic eyes, kneeling in an underground chamber over a body, in the silence of a place that hasn't had living visitors in a very long time. Ebrietas was discovered by the scholars of Byrgenwerth in the ancient Thumerian labyrinths, the oldest levels of the dungeons, beneath Yharnam, where the civilization that first made contact with the Great Ones built their most important ritual spaces. A Great One in the depths, alone, present long after everything that had surrounded her had collapsed or moved on. The reason she was there, the story of how she came to be in the Thumerian depths, rather than wherever Great Ones exist when they aren't in the spaces human beings can access, is never provided. The cosmos doesn't annotate its decisions. She was there when the scholars arrived, and the scholars recognized what she was, and over the years the relationship that eventually gave the healing church its deepest access to Great One knowledge developed from that initial encounter. She shared what she had. The cosmic blood, the variant that doesn't produce beasthood the way the ordinary old blood does, the purer strain more aligned with ascension. The substance the choir used in their most advanced work, she allowed the scholars access to it. She permitted communion. She let them study her, observe her, use her as the source of what they were building their entire program around. She did not resist. Whether this was willingness in any strong sense or simply the absence of objection, whether she understood what they were going to do with what they learned from her, or whether the alien nature of Great One cognition made that kind of foresight unavailable to her, the game doesn't resolve this. What it shows is that she gave, and they took, repeatedly, over many years, and what she received in return was more time alone. The scholars came and went on their schedule. The choir conducted its experiments. The institution advanced its agenda. And Ebrietas remained in the altar of despair through all of it, between visits, through the long periods when no one came at all, in the underground chamber that the choir had designated for its most significant work and then left when the work stopped producing results the choir wanted to keep pursuing. She remained after the scholars' consciousnesses dissolved. She remained after the choir's members achieved whatever level of communion destroyed their capacity for ordinary cognition. She remained after the upper cathedral ward emptied and the grand experiment concluded in its various forms of catastrophic failure. She is still here when you descend to her chamber, still kneeling over the body, still mourning whatever she is mourning. Her back is to you when you enter, and the game holds that moment. The enormous cosmic entity bent over its grief in an underground room, unaware of being watched for long enough that you understand something about her before the fight begins. When your strike lands and she turns, something at the movement looks startled, and then she's defending herself with the full capacity of what she is, and the fight is fierce and dangerous, and carries the specific quality of violence that erupts from grief that has been building too long with nowhere to go. This is the tragedy the choir built their program around without ever acknowledging. They found a Great One who was alone, who shared what she had, who allowed communion and permitted study, and gave the cosmic blood that all their most advanced experiments required, and they treated her as a resource. They used the access she allowed them to build something that had nothing to do with her well-being or the continuation of her company. They came back for what they needed and left when they had it. And Ebrietas, whose name means cosmic intoxication, whose origins are in the space between stars, who has been in this underground chamber for longer than the healing church has existed, she is still in the posture of mourning when you find her, still alone, still carrying whatever grief this particular body before her has created. She is the most sympathetic figure in the upper cathedral ward, possibly the most sympathetic in a game full of people and beings who deserved better than what happened to them. She gave freely to those who came. They took freely and left. And what was left is this: a great one in a dark chamber, kneeling over a body in a space that the people who were supposed to be communing with her have long since abandoned. On the roof of Cainhurst Castle, at the absolute top of the structure, in the open air of the frozen mountains with nothing above him but the sky, a figure in white robes has been keeping watch. His name was Logarius. He led the executioners, the healing church's enforcement arm. Not the hunters who managed beasts, the executioners managed people. Specifically, people the church designated as threats to its doctrinal purity, its authority, its monopoly on the blood, and on what the blood was permitted to mean. The vile bloods of Cainhurst were the target, practitioners of blood arts that diverged from the church's official methodology in ways the church found unacceptable, claiming a different relationship with the old blood's potential that the church could not permit to exist as an alternative to submission to its own authority. Cainhurst itself is worth dwelling on. The castle predates the healing church entirely, an old noble estate in the frozen mountains, the seat of an aristocratic family that had maintained its power for generations before Laurence or Willem or any of the church's founding figures were born. The vile bloods weren't imitators of the church's blood ministration. They had their own tradition, their own practices, their own understanding of what the blood could do that the church later decided was impure and unacceptable. A traitor from Bergenworth, the item descriptions use that word, traitor, which tells you whose perspective is being reported, brought forbidden knowledge to Cainhurst, gave the noble family access to secrets the scholars had developed, and the vile bloods built their blood arts from that foundation. Queen Annalise was immortal through the blood she had developed. Her goal was to produce a child of blood, something she describes with a focused aristocratic precision that is either inspiring or deeply unsettling depending on how you read her. An heir that would be more than human, a continuation of the vile blood line elevated beyond what ordinary inheritance could produce. The church branded them as practitioners of vile blood arts, as corrupters of the sacred tradition of blood ministration. But the vile blood's own perspective, as much as we can reconstruct it from the castle and its contents, is simpler. Why should the church have a monopoly on what the blood can do? Why should access to the blood's potential be mediated through an institution that had arrogated to itself exclusive rights to a tradition that it appropriated from Thumerian civilization in the first place? The Church's claim to doctrinal authority over the blood is the claim of an institution that arrived second and decided that being second with force was the same as being first with legitimacy. Logarius led the campaign to Cainhurst. It was thorough, systematic, conducted with the efficiency of people who have organised their violence around a conviction that makes it feel less like violence than service. The castle's inhabitants were killed. Inside the castle, he found something the item description calls it a vile secret, without specifying that led him to his final decision. Queen Annalise, the immortal vile blood queen, could not be killed in any conventional sense. Containing her was the only available option. He placed a seal on the throne room. He ensured the chamber couldn't be entered or exited, and then he sat on the roof of the castle and decided he would guard the seal himself personally, because no one else he could delegate the duty to could be trusted to maintain it indefinitely. He has been there ever since. When you climb the towers and reach the roof, you find what the vigil produced. Flesh desiccated over bones, the white robes weathered to grey, the body of a man who chose to spend his remaining years on a rooftop in the frozen mountains until the remaining years ran out and the years after them too, sustained by whatever combination of arcane power and conviction and the particular momentum of a purpose, chosen and committed to, completely allows a human body to keep going after the ordinary conditions for continuation have long since ceased. He is barely animate. He is entirely determined. His arcane knowledge, the floating skulls, the conjured weapon, the burning phase where faith compressed to its limit, becomes something incandescent, remains entirely intact, as if the conviction that maintained his vigil maintained this too. The combat capacity of a man who never stopped being what he was professionally, even as the professional was long dead. The failure of his vigil is visible when you reach the sealed throne room. Annalise is there, patient, immortal, having outlasted him, as she has outlasted everything: the siege, the deaths of all her subjects, the decades of sealed isolation, all of it simply time that passed while she waited. She is still there. He achieved his objective, she didn't escape. The seal held and failed his purpose entirely because the purpose was to end the vile bloodline, and the vile blood queen is exactly as alive as she has always been and will remain so. The man on the roof died for something that didn't accomplish what he thought it was accomplishing. Annalise herself is a study in what patience looks like when the person practicing it has no other option. She sits on her throne in the sealed chamber, in the same aristocratic composure she presumably occupied before Logarius sealed the door. She speaks to you if you reach her, with the measured grace of someone who has been waiting for a visitor for a very long time, and has decided that visitors' arrival warrants courtesy rather than desperation. She wants to continue the vile bloodline. She wants a champion to bring her the dregs of powerful blood. She wants, eventually, to bear the child of blood that has been her goal since before the church decided to destroy everything she had built. The institution that sent Logarius to eliminate her is, in all likelihood, gone in its functional sense by the time the game takes place. The man who sealed her in is a desiccated corpse on the roof, and she is still here, still with the same goal, still composed, still waiting. There is something in that persistence, whether it is admirable or terrifying, or simply the natural expression of immortality, meeting a purpose that the game leaves entirely open for you to decide. The Amygdalas have been in Yharnam for longer than any living person in the city can confirm. They cling to the sides of buildings throughout Cathedral Ward, multiple jointed limbs draped over the Gothic architecture, bodies too large for the spaces they occupy, present at every major location in the city where significant things have happened or are happening. They were there when Laurence founded the Healing Church. They were there when the first blood ministration was administered. They were there for every hunt night, every beast transformation, every cleric who suppressed the change for another year before finally giving way to it. They have always been there. The veil that Rom maintained kept them below the threshold of ordinary perception. With enough insight, with enough of the cosmic awareness the game measures as a number beside your blood echoes, they begin to appear. And once you can see them, they are impossible to unsee, impossible to imagine having not been there all along. The city that seemed to be about the struggle between humans and beasts reveals itself, at sufficient insight levels, to also contain enormous cosmic entities clinging to every significant surface. They were always the audience. The hunt was always observed. The Amygdala encountered in the Nightmare Frontier is one of the game's most alien encounters in feel rather than in design. The Nightmare Frontier is a strange realm fog and peculiar insects and precarious paths over drops that don't end in any visible flaw, the geometry suggesting somewhere that doesn't follow the logic of ordinary space, a liminal location that feels like it exists at the margin between several different kinds of existence without fully being any of them. The Amygdala found here is enormous, with the specific enormity of something that exists at a different scale of reality, not large in the way a large animal is large, but large in the way a building is large, large in the way of something for which the human beings it encounters are a different category of thing, rather than merely a smaller version of the same category. It attacks by tearing off its own limbs and throwing them. The detached arms continue moving independently, reaching and grasping and pursuing, because for this entity the difference between an arm attached to the body and an arm separated from it is not the difference between functional and non-functional, but simply a different configuration of available tools. The concept of bodily integrity that makes self-dismemberment horrifying to human observers doesn't apply here. The fundamental categories of self and not self, of inside and outside, of what constitutes the body as opposed to what the body does, these don't organize the Amygdala's existence the way they organize ours. The Amygdalas are connected to the Moon Presence agents or servants, or something more complex than either of those words fully captures. They have lifted hunters from the city streets and deposited them in the nightmare realms. They are the mechanism through which the cosmic entities running the larger game touch the smaller one happening in Yharnam's streets. They watch because something above them determined watching was needed. They act when action is required. They have been here, on the buildings of this city, watching the hunt unfold for as long as the hunt has been running, present through all of it, invisible to the people it was happening to, witnessing everything. Past the brain of Menses with its hundreds of watching eyes, past the architecture that has long since stopped pretending to be architecture, in the elevated quiet of Mergo's loft at the heart of the nightmare, there is a crib. The crib is empty of anything visible, but Mergo cries, high, continuous, the sound of an infant that has been crying for a very long time and has never been quieted, never been answered in any way that the crying was asking to be answered. The crying has been sustaining the nightmare. The school of Mensis's ritual anchored itself to Mergo's presence, and Mergo's presence is this persistent, unresolved distress, and so the nightmare has persisted as long as the crying has continued. When you approach, the wet nurse appears. She is tall and black-robed, multiple blades emerging from her form as if conjured from the dark of the robes themselves. She moves with the precise economy of something that exists for one purpose and executes that purpose without remainder. She makes no sound except the displacement of air and the whisper of cloth. She does not pause. She does not communicate. She defends the crib because defending the crib is the complete content of her existence, before which and after which there is nothing. Mergo is the infant Great One born of Queen Yharnam's contract with Whedon. The birth was the death of the Queen, or the end of her physical existence in a way that left her consciousness in a permanent middle state, present and absent simultaneously. Mergo exists in the nightmare, sustained by the Mensis ritual that reached for it, crying in the loft where the school's broken minds placed their attention when they sought to force contact with the Great One and succeeded in the worst possible way. The fight takes place under a blood moon, Mergo's crying constant throughout. The wet nurse defends without relenting. When you defeat her and approach the crib, the crying stops. The silence that follows is the most significant. Silence in the game. Not peaceful exactly, not triumphant, but carrying the specific weight of something that has been running without interruption finally ceasing. The nightmare that the crying sustained begins to change. The ritual loses its anchor. The school of Mensis's achievement, their direct contact with a Great One, the thing that destroyed them and created this realm of torment, begins to unravel. What happened to Mergo when the crying stopped is a question the game doesn't resolve. Whether there was peace for the infant Great One in the cessation, whether the cessation was the end or simply a different kind of continuation, whether an infant Great One can die in any sense that the word death applies to. These are the questions the silence leaves you holding as you stand beside the empty-seeming crib. In the hunter's nightmare, past the burning streets and the tortured hunters who inhabit the nightmare's version of Yharnam in permanent punishment for what the hunt produced, you descend into a massive underground chamber and find Ludwig. He is not what he was, not by any measure. The creature that fills the space is enormous and equine, a distorted horse beast with healing church hunter armor fused into the body, antlers rising from a head that has been reorganized by the transformation beyond any human shape. He charges, he slams, he screams. He is operating at pure animal panic without the strategy or conviction or purpose that defined him when he was the person who built the institution you've been navigating through the DLC. Ludwig founded the Healing Church Hunters as a formal organization. Before him there was Gehrman and the first workshop, small, personal, the original foundation, that the church then decided to scale into something that fit its growing need. Ludwig came after and built the structure, ranks, discipline, a theological framework that made the hunt feel like holy service rather than managed violence, hunters operating explicitly under the church's sanction, with the church's resources and the church's blessing on what they did at night in the streets. He made people feel the work was worth doing. He was the standard against which everything that came after was measured. He received the Holy Moonlight Sword in communion with the Great Ones, a weapon of pure arcane energy, channeling light from somewhere other than this world, beautiful in a way that hunting weapons are not usually permitted to be beautiful. He carried it into the worst of the scourge, and people followed him, and the hunt had, briefly, the quality of something meaningful, rather than just endlessly ongoing. The blood took him. It always does, given enough time and enough of it. Regardless of conviction or purpose or the quality of the cause being served, Ludwig transformed into what occupies the chamber, and the equine shape may be literal, a merger with the horse he rode, the animal becoming part of the transformation, and the resulting creature combining both into something neither of them were separately. He is still enormous, still armed, still capable of the arcane combat that the Holy Moonlight Sword requires. At half health, the sword visible on the ground, he picks it up, and something changes. The second phase is precise and skilled. The light of the sword cutting through the beast form in arcs that carry the discipline of the man who wielded it in life. He is still transformed, but the weapon found something in him that the beast had buried. When you kill him, his head lies on the ground, and the last fragment of coherent thought surfaces through the dying. Were they good hunters? The ones who came after? The institution he built and devoted his life to, and eventually became a monument in the nightmare of? He needs to know, at the moment of final death, whether the thing he gave everything to built anything worth having. The question is the most human thing in the room. The room is full of the aftermath of what the hunt produced, what the church built, what Ludwig's own life was folded into and eventually consumed by. He is asking from the floor of the nightmare, in the last moment before the beast form lets go of whatever fragment of him remained, whether any of it mattered. In the nightmare version of the research hall, at the top of the building in the Lumenwood garden that grows from the roof, where the trees reach toward a sky that has become something wrong, the unsuccessful results of the choir's experimental program stand in the space between what they were and what they were being made into. Not the ones who died. Those are past this, past judgment, past anything the garden has used for. The living failures are the ones who didn't complete the transformation in either direction. They went far enough into the choir's process that returning was not possible, and not far enough that anything stable was reached. They are suspended in the middle of something the choir started and could not finish, permanent residents of a state that was never meant to be permanent, the transitional phase institutionalized by the fact that the institution that was supposed to transition them out of it abandoned the project. Their faces have merged with their bodies. The features that would have told you who they were, that would have let someone recognize them, are gone. Smooth, pale surface where there should be expressions. The architecture of human recognition dissolved by a process that was reorganizing the body, and stopped before it finished. They can project arcane energy. Together they can call down meteorites from the sky above the garden, reaching toward the cosmos with the partial capacity of beings who are almost elevated enough to make contact but not quite. The sky darkens and then lights with incoming fire. This is what it looks like when someone is almost transcendent, but the almost is permanent. They do not attack you until you enter the space where they exist. Whatever remains of the people inside these transitional forms does not orient toward threat or toward purpose. They simply exist in the garden. The fact that they are in the nightmare version of the research hall rather than the waking world version suggests what the nightmare preserves. The ongoing experiment, frozen at the moment the choir's work stopped progressing. These particular subjects in these particular states maintained by the logic of a nightmare that keeps everything terrible exactly as it was. In the Astral Clocktower, separated from the research hall by a locked door that requires a key found in the nightmare, a chair stands at the centre of a circular room. A figure is seated in the chair with her head bowed and her eyes closed. The room carries the quality of long stillness. Dust in the light from the high windows, silence that has been accumulating for years. The particular atmosphere of a place that has not been disturbed in a very long time. Then she opens her eyes. Maria was one of Gehrman's most gifted students. She came from Cainhurst, Velblood lineage, the aristocratic tradition that the church eventually sent Logarius to destroy. A heritage she distanced herself from by choosing the hunter's path rather than the vile blood arts. She was exceptional with the rakuyo, the trick weapon she shared with her companion Simon, capable enough that Gehrman's teaching elevated her to the level where she could be called the finest hunter he trained. She served the hunt faithfully and well. She was at the fishing hamlet. This is the weight that her entire story in the DLC is built on. She was there when the scholars came to the hamlet. She participated in what happened. The killing of the villagers, the desecration of Kos, the violation that the curse of Kos was created in response to. She had fought alongside people whose decision to treat the hamlet as a resource to be extracted, rather than a community to be respected, she either agreed with or could not prevent. And the guilt of it destroyed something fundamental in her that she never recovered. She threw the rakuyo into the well of the hamlet before she left. This is not a casual act. Hunters do not discard their weapons. The weapon is the hunter, the extension of the self that makes the hunt possible. To throw the rakuyo into the well was to say, with an action rather than words, that she was no longer willing to be the person who did what she did at the hamlet. It was the most honest thing available to her, the one gesture she could make that acknowledged the full weight of what had happened. She went to the research hall and spent the remaining years of her life caring for the patients there, trying in whatever space was available to her to find something redemptive in what was left. She died in the research hall. The nightmare took her, and in the nightmare she guards the Astral Clocktower, which guards the path to the fishing hamlet, trying in death to do what she couldn't do in life. Keep people away from what cannot be made right. Prevent anyone from adding to the harm. Protect a place from the further violation that her presence at it helped make possible. In death, the nightmare gives her back the rakuyo, retrieved from the well by some nightmare logic that doesn't honour the symbolic weight of the gesture that put it there. In death, the nightmare has her bleed into her attacks in ways she would have found repellent in life, her Cainhurst blood drawn into the combat she spent her final years trying to leave behind. The nightmare is not interested in redemption. The nightmare preserves what was done, not what was intended after. When she falls, she whispers something about failing, about not being able to protect them. The children, the villagers, the patients of the research hall, the unnamed people who deserved better than what she could give them. She had tried genuinely in the years after the hamlet to become something better than what she had been. The nightmare gave her eternity to keep trying and made certain she would always fail. On the shore of the fishing hamlet, past the shades of the murdered villagers frozen in the moment of their deaths and reanimated by the nightmare into vengeful permanence, past the architecture of the massacre preserved exactly as it was, on the beach, where Kos's enormous body still lies, massive and still, a great one rendered into an object by the scholar's treatment of it, something emerges. The orphan is born in front of you. It comes from inside Kos's body, from inside the corpse of the Great One who was violated while carrying it, trailing the cord that connected it to a mother who was already violated and already gone, in all the ways that mattered when the scholars arrived with their instruments. It holds a weapon made from its own placenta, fashioned from what should have been the material of its safe arrival into the world. It screams. The sound it makes when it emerges is something the Bloodborne community verified through careful audio comparison. It is the same sound file used for Gehrman crying in his sleep, audible if you rest at the hunter's dream after certain points in the story. Two beings separated by centuries and circumstance, connected by entirely different facets of the same central wound. The orphan born into violation, Gehrman imprisoned for grief, making the same sound in their respective captivities. The cry of an infant deprived of its mother, and the cry of an old man imprisoned in a dream he cannot escape from are, in Bloodborne's design, the same cry. What the orphan is fighting for is not something that can be named in the usual terms. It is not protecting territory. It is not serving a purpose. It is not defending something it values. The orphan has nothing to protect, nothing to value, nothing to orient around. Its mother is the violated body behind it on the shore. The village that would have welcomed it is the nightmare of massacred shades ahead of it. It has been in this nightmare, in this moment of arrival, in this ongoing emergency of having emerged into violation. It has been in this since the scholars came to the hamlet. It has no other mode. It has only the agony and the energy that agony generates, and the available target of the hunter who has come to this shore. In its second phase, the physical collapses into the cosmic. The placenta weapon is abandoned, ghost wings spread. The Great One it would have grown into briefly visible through the traumatized creature it is. The shape of what it could have been, haunting the edges of what it actually became. It reaches toward forms it never had the safety to develop into. It expresses, in the second phase, the enormous potential that the scholar's violation foreclosed. When you kill the orphan, the doll's words come to you from the hunter's dream. Gehrman is sleeping soundly for the first time in a long time. The connection between the orphan's cry and Gehrman's dream weeping is not coincidental. The crime at the fishing hamlet, the specific act of violation that the curse of Kos is the cosmic response to, is connected to the dream that holds Gehrman and to the system that holds everyone. When the orphan's crying ends, something in the architecture of the nightmare and the dream shifts, not healed, not resolved, shifted, the way the weight of something changes when one part of it is finally set down. The shore is the same, the body is the same, the massacre happened and cannot be made to not have happened, but the child that was crying has stopped, and the old man in the garden is sleeping without weeping, and whatever piece is available in this story is made of exactly this kind of terrible, insufficient silence. In the Grand Cathedral of the Hunter's Nightmare, the nightmare duplicate of the cathedral Laurence built, the same space where Vicar Amelia prayed, the physical expression of everything the healing church became, Laurence is on fire. He has been on fire for as long as the nightmare has existed. He will be on fire for as long as the nightmare persists. The fire does not consume him in the way that ordinary fire consumes. It emanates from inside him, seeping through the cracks in the transformed body, the way that lava seeps through rock, pooling where he moves, lighting the cathedral floor in the deep orange of something that burns at a temperature too high for ordinary combustion. He is the first Cleric Beast, the founder of the healing church, the man who left Bergenworth with the old blood and the conviction that Master Willem's caution was over-caution, who built the institution and the doctrine and the hierarchy that set in motion every catastrophe depicted in the base game and the DLC both. He became what he built the church to fight. He became it not gradually, as the base game's clerics do, but absolutely. The first, the original, the one who was perhaps always going to be this because he was the one who refused the warning that would have prevented all of it. His skull exists in two places. In the Waking Cathedral ward, the skull on Vicar Amelia's altar is the skull of a different creature, one the church repurposed as Laurence's relic. In the nightmare, his actual skull can be found in the Grand Cathedral's interior, and when you bring it to the burning beast that was his body, something happens. The passive, motionless, burning mass stirs at the proximity of the object. It reaches for it. Some fragment of recognition, below the level of language, below the level of memory, operating as something more like instinct or reflex, responds to the presence of what used to be its face. It reaches for the skull and cannot grasp it, and the fight begins. The fire that covers him is the curse of Kos made physical and permanent. The scholars who violated the fishing hamlet are bound in the hunter's nightmare. This is their punishment, permanent inhabitation of a realm of torment, eternal maintenance of the conditions the hunt produced at its worst. Laurence burns because he directed the burning of old Yharnam. He ordered the incineration of a district and everyone in it. The beast in the nightmare is saturated with fire, lava seeping through the body as it moves, the second phase conducted as a torso dragging itself across the cathedral floor, trailing burning fluid, because the first vicar of the healing church sent fire into old Yharnam, and the nightmare holds him to the measure of what he sent. The item description of his skull reads, "It is a symbol of Laurence's past and what he failed to protect. He is destined to seek his skull, but even if he found it, it could never restore his memories. He reaches for it and cannot hold it, and the memories it represents are gone regardless. The person who made the choices that produced this outcome no longer exists inside the burning creature that those choices produced. He can gesture toward his humanity in the one way still available to him. He cannot have it back. And finally, in the hunter's dream, the eternal twilight garden, the flowers at every grave, the workshop that is the echo of a workshop that no longer exists, the liminal space between the waking world and the nightmares. Gehrman is waiting. He is in his wheelchair, as he has always been when you arrive here. As he was on the first visit, gentle and strange, offering advice with the quality of someone who has said these particular words many times before. As he was on every subsequent visit, always present, always tending the graves between your returns, always there with the quiet patience of someone who has been waiting a very long time and has stopped registering the waiting as distinct from the existence. He has been here through 360-some hunters, by one accounting that the law supports, each one brought into the dream at the beginning of a hunt, guided through it, advised by this old man in the wheelchair, and eventually offered the same final mercy at the end. He has said goodbye hundreds of times. He has meant it every single time. His offer now is genuine. He has always meant the offer. The burial blade was forged from siderite, the metal that falls from the heavens, iron from outside the world, the material used specifically for things that are meant to be different from what ordinary human craft produces. And it was made not for combat, but for what its item description calls a funeral, a dirge of farewell. It was built for exactly this purpose. He wants to use it to free you from the dream the way he has freed hundreds of hunters before you. The act of freeing someone from the dream requires the mercy killing that the burial blade was designed to deliver. He offers it with the quietness of someone who knows the gift is genuine, and the giving costs him nothing except the ongoing loneliness of the garden after you're gone. He cannot use it on himself. This is the entire structure of his tragedy and the entire structure of Bloodborne simultaneously. The person who built the mechanisms of mercy for every hunter who passes through the dream is excluded from the mercy by the mechanisms he built. The exit he offers others is not available to him. He cannot leave the garden. He cannot be freed by someone else doing for him what he does for the hunters, because the dream requires him to sustain it, and the moon presence that established the dream requires Gehrman in the role he occupies, and there is no one with authority over the system who would exercise that authority on his behalf. He has been in this garden for however long the dream has been running, through however many hunters, watching them go while he stays, saying goodbye hundreds of times with the genuine knowledge that goodbye is something the person he's saying it to will actually be able to use, and then tending the graves, and then waiting for the next arrival. The door opens again, and someone new comes through and the cycle continues. Refuse his offer, and he stands from the wheelchair. What rises is the first hunter at his full capacity, carrying everything that decades of practice in a twilight garden have refined rather than diminished. The art of quickening surrounds him in blue luminescent fog. The technique he developed, the movement philosophy that defines the burial blade's combat style, the thing that Gehrman invented, and that every subsequent hunter's workshop adapted and inherited. The burial blade moves through space in the wide crescent arcs of someone who has been using this particular weapon for longer than any other hunter has been alive, who has had this particular practice refined not by combat, but by whatever the equivalent of practice is in a dream where you cannot age and cannot die, and have nothing but time. He is extraordinary in the way that only something genuinely original can be, not performing a tradition but being the source of it. He fights without anger. He fights the way. Someone fights when giving something is the only way remaining to give it. When he falls, he reaches upward from the ground, one hand extended towards something above him that is not visible in the garden. Maria, most likely, the woman whose loss drove him to their bargain, or the grief that ended with the dream. The woman in whose likeness the doll was made, whose hair ornament Gehrman keeps by the workshop's furnace, whose absence the dream has been shaped around in every detail that Gehrman chose when building it. He reaches toward what he was always reaching toward, what the garden was always built to hold the shape of, what 300 goodbyes were a poor substitute for. The moon presence descends if you have consumed the umbilical cord fragments. If you have built enough of the Great One's essence into yourself, consumed enough of the cosmic biology that connects human and divine, to be capable of resisting what the moon presence offers when it offers to embrace you, descends with the same motion it used to descend on Gehrman, an embrace that is also a claiming, a welcoming that is also a taking, this same gesture that has been repeated at every hunter's arrival into the dream in the form of the covenant that sustains the system. It reaches for you the way it reached for him, with whatever passes for desire in a cosmic entity whose motivations are alien to human understanding, but whose behavior, collecting hunters, sustaining a dream that perpetuates an endless cycle of violence, using the grief of a single person as the emotional foundation of a mechanism that serves the moon presence's purposes, is visible in its effects even when its reasoning is not. If you resist, the final battle begins, not against a beast, not against a corrupted human, against the system itself, made briefly manifest in a form that can be damaged. When the moon presence falls, you become something new, an infant great one, small and crying, held by the doll who asks if you're cold, and the doll holds you with the tenderness of something that has been waiting a very long time for something to hold. The night of the hunt becomes something else. The garden remains, the flowers remain, the graves remain, marked with the names of every hunter who was freed or who took Gehrman's place before you arrived to do neither. What happens next is yours to hold in the silence after the credits. Every boss in Bloodborne is a question asked in the shape of a body. The Cleric Beast screams on the Great Bridge because it never stopped being in pain. Father Gascoigne forgot the song. Vicar Amelia prayed the liturgy of a faith that was consuming her as she recited it. Ludwig asked at the moment of death whether any of it had mattered. Maria fought in death to guard the door she helped open in life. Laurence reaches for a skull that cannot give him back what he lost. The orphan cries with the same sound as the old man in the garden. Gehrman offers one more. Time. What he has always offered and what has never been available to him. These are not monster stories. They are human stories wearing monster shapes, carrying the weight of what the system did to the people it claimed to serve, asking in the only language available to them, the language of the fight, the language of the encounter, the language of what two things do when they face each other in the dark, what all of it was for and who was responsible, and whether any of it was ever going to end any other way. There is a question that runs underneath all of it, beneath every boss fight and every item description and every piece of environmental storytelling, underneath the blood and the beasts and the cosmic horror and the nightmare realms. What does it cost to reach for something you were never meant to reach for? The Temerian civilization answered this question millennia ago, and the answer was buried with them in their chalice dungeons, and then the scholars of Bergenworth dug down to the answer and found it and ignored it, and the Healing Church built its entire institution on top of the ignored answer, and the choir and the school of Mensis and Canehurst, and every individual hunter and cleric and scholar we've spoken of tonight each encountered the answer again in their own way, and were consumed by it. The answer is always the same. The answer is every creature on every bridge and in every arena we've visited tonight. The answer is what the old blood produces when given enough time and enough of itself. The answer is what the great ones are when approached on terms they didn't set and can't accommodate, and are too alien to understand the human need to approach them on. The answer is the sound the Cleric Beast makes when it screams, and the sound Father Gascoigne makes when he says "forgive me," and the sound Mergo makes in the loft while the nightmare persists, and the sound Gehrman makes in his sleep in the garden. The answer is suffering, and the suffering has causes, and the causes have names, and Bloodborne trusts you to know them by the end, having walked through every corridor and every arena, and every impossible nightmare space, having looked at every creature that was once a person, and every institution that claimed to be serving humanity while consuming it. You know the names. You have been in the places where the decisions were made. You have seen what those decisions produced. That knowledge is the only thing the game gives you that cannot be taken back. Not the hunter's skill, which resets between playthroughs. Not the blood echoes, which are lost and regained and lost again. The knowledge of what happened in Yharnam and why. The names of the people who made the choices and the names of what those choices produced. That knowledge persists. That is the eyes on the inside that Master Willem was always actually asking for. Not the physical implantation of eyes in brains. Not the cosmic transformation of consciousness through exposure to the Great Ones. The act of looking at what actually happened carefully and without flinching, and understanding what it means. Sleep well. The hunt can wait. Thank you for spending tonight in Yharnam with me. If these long quiet journeys through a game's lore are the kind of thing that brings you back, subscribe and leave a comment with whoever here you found yourself grieving for. I read everyone. May the good blood guide your dreams.